am so happy to welcome to Joy on Paper Mark Laporta, who has just come out with his third book called Mirror at the Heart of Time. It is the end of a trilogy called The Changing Hearts of Ixdahan Daherek, right? Did I get that right, Mark?
You got it exactly right.
Goody, oh goody, I'm so happy. You know, it's a very nice name. I really liked it. Once you see it on paper and you read it, it sticks with you.
Well, I wanted to give him a distinctive name because I wanted him to be very different from anyone you might meet.
He is different, and he starts off really different.
Yes.
I was wondering, Mark, do you ever stand in front of a mirror and just look at yourself and say, how do I have all this wonderful stuff in my head?
Well, I mean, I've been with me my whole life, so I know how it happened. I mean, it's just an accumulation of reading and thinking and pulling creative ideas from different sources, and just what's in there.
You've got, your head reminds me, my favorite sci-fi writer is Mike Resnick. I was telling him that I would just love to be able to, miniaturize myself and just go floating around in his brain, because it must be like a psychedelic experience. He has so many brilliant ideas and so many ideas that nobody else has, and I think your brain must be the same thing. It's full of a lot of great stuff.
Well, thanks.
I've always loved sci-fi. Actually, I started sci-fi because of Mike Resnick, because he's won more sci-fi awards than any other sci-fi writer, and I love his work, because what I've discovered with him is when I first started, I wasn't really like a sci-fi fan, and I read his books, and then after a while I realized I'm reading sci-fi, and I had forgotten. I mean, I was in his worlds, and That's what you do with this wonderful series. And I think a lot of your readers must be sorry that it's a trilogy, because it's really, really good.
Well, I'm glad that you feel that way, and I hope that more and more people will find out about the book, and especially the teenagers it's written for, and get excited about it.
Well, I think so, too. We really have to get the word out there, because, as you said, you came out with an unusual name, and I don't know if I get the next part right. You tell me if I'm pronouncing it right. Snarldrialoran.
Ixdahan is a Snarldrialoran. He comes from the planet Snarldrialor.
Okay.
Many light years away from Earth in a distant galaxy.
And when we first meet him, he's quite unusual.
Yes, he's an 8-tentacled cephalopod. Who
dreams of becoming a man?
No, he doesn't dream it. It's the problem is he's a teenager. He's 17 years old. He's the son of Snarldrialor's most prominent diplomat, and father decides it comes from a wealthy family. His father decides he's not living a decent life, and he's going to cut his allowance in half. And so to compensate, he steals his father's identity card and sells secret documents to the enemy for a sum, and lives high for a while until they catch him. And then his punishment is to receive the worst punishment in the universe, which is life on Earth as a human teenager. They put him in a transmog chamber and, rewrite his genetic code until he becomes a human, and he lands on Earth and has to live his life as a human teenager under the guidance of two robots who are made to look human and act human, and so on and so forth.
Well, it is very clever, and I think teenagers will... and not just for teenagers. Everyone can relate to this story. You've done a fantastic job. Of course, Daherek turns out to be Derek on Earth here. Tell us a little bit more about the story. When you started at first, you planned on a trilogy, right?
Yeah, I focused, when I wrote the first book, I focused on the first book, and I kept in the back of my mind, this could be a trilogy, but let's not pressure ourselves too much. But by the time I'd gotten more than halfway through, I realized it really did have the strong potential for a trilogy. So then I started working, with that thought in mind, that it could be a trilogy. And not in a forced way, not with having to, change the premise of the book or the tone or any of those other things. I could stay true to my original idea and still keep it moving forward.
And that first book was called Heart of Earth. And
Heart of Earth.
And then the second book is Heart of Mystery. Heart of Mystery. So you've carried through the story, and of course, you've introduced some human characters, and I think you've done that beautifully. I love the third person, the way you write. I think it's excellent.
Yeah, well, that's one thing that I really try to do. Is I find first person limiting. I mean, you can do it, but would found it too limiting for these ideas, but I found there was a way to keep a third-person narrative but still get inside the mind of characters at different moments and sort of be sort of in a transitional state between first person and third person, in the sense that you're really hearing their thoughts and their immediate reactions to things. And you can slip, I found I could slip in and out of objective narrative, omnipotent narrative, and this more intimate self-narrative that somebody was having.
Well, you do a beautiful job. You weave it all so nicely together. Both the writing, the narrative part, and your dialogue are really perfectly done.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm glad it comes across. I wanted the characters to be vivid and real and contemporary.
Well, they are, and I particularly, of course, like Lena. Well, I like all of the characters that you've introduced, but tell us a little bit how. What I like about Lena is that she's just an ordinary girl that I think all teenagers can relate to. She has her problems. She has a tragedy in her life, but there's no paranormal stuff to her. There's no unusual talents to her. She's just a regular girl.
Yeah, well, that was one of the challenges writing this genre, is that you want to have an exciting story, and a story in which the teenagers are doing exciting things, but you have to remember that they still are teenagers. So Lena can't suddenly have a PhD in physics and be able to figure out how to create a time warp and jump through it and save the day. She's got to work within her own boundaries, and she's very courageous. I mean, I did have the liberty of making her very intelligent and very talented. She's ordinary in one sense, but not so ordinary. See what I mean? So, but within that, she stays a human girl with the American culture in her background and her frame of reference, and she struggles to absorb this sudden jolt of a view of a wider universe that her contact with Ixdahan and later Professor Cray, brings to her.
It's always exciting, I think, in sci-fi that you create your own universe, you create your own world. When you started this, by the way, what program do you use? What program do you write in?
Oh, I just write in Word.
You just write in Word?
I don't have a storytelling software that I use or anything like that. I just write.
You just write. Okay, because I find that Scrivener is so helpful when you have such diverse characters as you do, just to keep them in order and in line.
I do something similar in that I make notes to myself. I mean, I'll have notes to myself while I say, well, I need to develop this part of the story, or this part's not clear, or I'm concerned about this. I do that sort of as a diary entry to myself on the side. I find I don't need a special program to do that, but of course anyone who finds a program useful should go ahead and use it.
First book, Heart of Earth, came out, in 2014, 3 years ago? And
yes.
So you've done like a book a year. These were your first books?
Yes, the first ones I did another novel shortly before Heart of Earth that was similar in some ways, but I didn't feel it was really ready for the world. And then I got this idea and went forward with it. I thought this idea was broader and deeper and more sustainable than the first idea. And I've been writing off and on my whole life, in the sense that I would start things and I was interested. I would write short stories. I would write somewhere around the last 5 or 10 years. I found my voice as a writer, and then suddenly I had the confidence to sit down and say, yes, I can write a novel. And yes, I can trust my ideas that I can develop them. And yes, I have the personal authority to go ahead and do all these things and not wonder, well, what would so-and-so think and what would so-and-so think? You just go ahead and you realize that, as I like to say, the pencil has two ends. So you can write, but you can also erase. So anything you put down, if you don't like it, you can take it out later. You just don't have to have anxiety about it. Just keep going. And meanwhile, you keep your eyes on the big overview. Where are you trying to go? What are you trying to do? Do things match up? Is this consistent? Is there a logic problem? How do you solve it? So on and so forth. And you just map it out a little at a time. And then you go back over. Each one of these books has been gone back over many, many times to find, is the writing crisp? Is everything that's happening moving the story forward? I try not to have anything that's just treading water, or even the most beautiful detail is there, I hope, to move the story forward. And that's how I look at it.
My biggest compliment to writers, when I think of a book as solid, that means you've gotten rid of all the extraneous things. Book flows. I don't have to worry about bad plots or anything like that. It's just I can read it straight through and just have the joy of reading it. That's what I found with your book. So with all your books, and when they first sent me the third book, I hadn't read the other two, I admit, but I immediately went back and I read them because I thought, wow, this guy just comes out of nowhere and he's such a solid writer, which is a big compliment from me.
Well, good.
Of course, this program being for writers and those who dream of writing. How did you find an agent?
Well, in my case, it's slightly different path. I mean, I did try to circulate it around with agents, and of course, it's a crowded field and it's a crowded world, and there are billions of books. And in fact, I didn't get more than the occasional polite refusal from an agent. But what happened was I was at a birthday party for a friend of mine, somebody I used to work with, and the person who's now my publisher, Stephen Drockman, was there, and he was just at the ground floor of starting Chickadee Prince books. And we were talking, and he was telling me about his book series about a character named Wat O'Hue, which is a marvelous series that deserves more attention. In any case, we were comparing notes, and I told him about the plot line of Heart of Earth. He made a couple of suggestions, and over time we kept a dialogue going. And as I started to get a little bit of a response with Heart of Earth, because I put it through Goodreads. Goodreads has a service where you can agree to review 4 people's books, and 4 people will agree to review your books. And I got a good response there, and he said, you should send it to Kirkus, which I'd never heard of. So I sent it to Kirkus, and I got a very good response, and then he became very enthusiastic and agreed to publish it. So that's really how it got started.
Well, he made a good decision, because I think that as we promote this book, and I will promote it, I will put it, of course, on my summer reading list, but I also will talk about it when I talk quite often to writers groups. I particularly love, as I said, because I've taken this great love of science fiction. When I talk to sci-fi groups, I will recommend your books, this because it is so very, very beautifully written.
Well, that's a great recommendation.
When a writer really has put so much into a book, it is wonderful to see the results. It is wonderful to see how, as I said, of course, this third book is a standalone. They're all standalone. You could read them without having read the whole series, although I would recommend it. And I think Amazon now is selling the entire trilogy, and it's well worth it. Why did you want particularly to reach young people? You have a message in here. What do you feel is the message that you want to get? And it's nice that the message is blended in with the story, so it's not like a preachy type of message. What do you hope for young people to get, besides they will just love reading? And I think that is probably the biggest gift that you can give to a child, is that they read a book. It's like when the Harry Potters came out, the kids who read those books have gone on to read more books in their life. And
right, exactly.
I think your books will do the same thing for any kid who gets these books.
Well, that's it. That's a nice hope. I mean, I didn't have just one message, but the thing when I started this, one of the things that was hovering in the back of the mind is how when I was a teenager, particularly age 14 or 15 or so, this feeling of you're sitting in a mass of swirling information. You've got your teenage world and you've got the adult world out there someplace, and you can't quite bridge it. You turn on the TV and listen to the politics of the world, and it contrasts very greatly with the values you have in your home and your school, and you can't find the relationship there, and adults can't answer your questions. And I often wondered what it would be like if I could find, not that I didn't have adults who cared about me and talked to me or something, but I never found that connection where someone would understand the question I'm asking and why am I asking it. In other words, why is the world like this? What's going on? What's the contrast between what I've been told and what I'm seeing? And how do I reconcile that and work with that? And for me, the key to it is maybe we need to start telling teenagers, I mean, not younger than teenagers, but teenagers, that human beings are put together from emotional conflicts, and there's nothing wrong with it. That's the way we're put together. But you have to know going into the world, even your own local world, that, you have to navigate that. You have to be aware that people aren't always coming at you straight, and they're not always even aware of it. In other words, there's just a lot of emotional pathways that you have to be aware of. Then there's just trying to get an understanding of human motivations. Early on, I was very fascinated by Shakespeare, not that I understood absolutely everything about it, but a lot of Shakespeare is ultimately like a psychology textbook. It talks about what drives people, what motivates them. And I think especially if you live in an isolated community or you have a limited group of contacts with the outside world, you're not going to understand what's really driving the world. So that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it, in the midst of all this swirling chaos and the stuff that happens politically and some stuff that happens in the mind of a teenager that's trying to grapple with all the emotional ups and downs, to hold on to a core of, knowing how to do the right thing by the people you care about, knowing how to identify the right people to care about, and knowing how to be, true to yourself at all times. So if you're in a situation, which I'm sure many teenagers have come across, where they like a particular song and their friends don't like that song, and they make that poor person feel bad because they like that song, and they wonder, well, maybe I'm wrong. I shouldn't like that song. But this idea of being true to yourself, saying, okay, it's okay that I like that song and they don't. If you see what I mean, does this make any sense to you? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And I think it comes through in your books, as I said, without being preachy. It's just part of your story. Of course, I think you have a background in advertising, right?
Yes, that's right.
You're good with words. And I think you're good with messages, too. So it worked out very nicely in your case.
Yeah, well, I had the experience of knowing how a messaging strategy can unfold over a large project. I mean, just to make it really technical. Of course, from an artistic standpoint, that can be a very cold thing. So I didn't really, I would just kept that as an awareness as I was going through it afterwards. In other words, yes, there's a message. Yes, I tried to have a message, but really what I was writing was a novel. I wanted it to be an entertaining novel primarily. And then if it could have a message, if it could connect to some of the larger themes, especially the second and third book, connect to some larger themes that could be ripped out of the headlines of the last few years. That's great, but the most relevant thing for me was, is the story evolving out of vivid characters that someone can care about, that they can be moved by, and that actually say something about what we like to call the human condition, although in some ways that's too highfalutin.
You've done a beautiful job, and the series is called The Changing Hearts of Ixdahan Daherek. I want to just compliment you on great job that you've done. I'm sure that you're already working on a new series because writers keep writing, which is wonderful, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and you're right about that. I am.
Okay, so I expect to have you back on in about a year when the new book comes out.
Okay, I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, so Mark Laporta, Mirror at the Heart of Time. It is the end of a trilogy called The Changing Hearts of Ixdahan Daherek, and it is really a wonderful, wonderful read. It is also a great gift for any teenagers in your life. Great summer reading, absolutely. They need something fun to read during the summer, and they will get into Mark Laporta's world. Again, thank you for joining me. Do you have a website that you want people to go to, or should they just go online?
They can visit my Amazon page, but they can also go to chickadeeprince.com and find my page there within that.
Okay. Again, Mark, thank you for joining me today. I really look forward to talking to you in about a year, okay?
I can't wait, Patzi.
Okay.